Hi everybody, I'm Billy, and this is Antioch, Chapter 16, Gunders and Greer. Antioch's day of worship gave way to night and a full moon. The fellowship locked themselves in before sunset, just beginning their plan to survive. The entire city was on alert. Toward that, Marabas stalked through the apple trees. At the glowing door of the cauldron's kitchen, he smelled smoke, milk, and Michael. He crept inside. Michael's sleeve was at the forge again, but his Callaghan was next to him. He scrubbed the butcher table with a big bristle brush by the light of the fireplace. Another brush jutted up from a bucket of milk on the cold grill. Marabas crept closer, sniffing. That's milk. Michael nearly jumped out of his long handles. Ah! With one hand over his heart and the other over his weapon, he realized who it was. Then he picked up the brush he'd dropped and shook it at the Gunder. Marabas! Stop sneaking around! Okay. Michael hadn't been startled like that in a long time. He had to collect himself. Marabas studied him, and then looked back and forth from the bucket to the brush. Michael could tell he was thinking something through. Marabas said, You're scrubbing the table, not the milk. Michael smiled a little. Yes, I've decided to see for myself if it works. The sailor said it gets the smoke out. Marabas snorted and sniffed his way through the kitchen. I smell the smoke. It's different with milk on it. Michael brightened. It is. Can you tell if this is working? What do you smell? Smoke with milk on it. Marabas had a keen sense of smell, but his speech was an unfortunate distillation of what it gathered. Ah! Michael stroked the butcher table and put his finger in his mouth. The infection didn't fizzle against the wren. Encouraged, he handed the other brush to Marabas, and the two of them scrubbed the kitchen together. As Marabas sniffed around, Michael tested for the infection, and they compared what they found. They soon discovered that the smoke was alive, and that milk killed it. Marabas could point out the dead patches from the living by scent. The front door stood open to the night, shining from the common room's fireplace. Michael sat scrubbing the stairs, and Marabas worked on the long table. Each had a mug of cider in reach, and each was keeping to his thoughts. Michael thought of Margot, how happy and grateful she'd been when he told her he would try to clean the smoke out of her house. She'd called him an angel. He'd always liked Margot. Marabas remembered 8 years before, when he'd been only a beardless pup, making frequent visits to the inn's back door. Fergus was always there with something good to eat. Bethenford would shout, You'll have Gunders at my door day and night. It's not right. When Fergus opened the cauldron, Marabas got to sit inside. Marabas said, I like Fergus. Michael had been half ignoring such childlike statements for hours. I know you do. The ink on the stairs made his milk suds black. Marabas had an awkward, inefficient style of scrubbing, like an ape at the easel. He would also spend long moments in motionless contemplation. His progress was slow. He drank some of his cider, snorting in the tankard. I like Margot. Michael drank to that. It was delicious. I do too. She's a fine woman. Cider was the drink in Antioch, and Margot's family made it the best. They'd been keeping secrets of body and flavor for generations. Michael thought of them as a sort of cider circle, with Margot as their mistress. Marabas absent-mindedly scratched himself with the brush, and then jumped at the touch of milk that trickled out of it. He sniffed it cautiously. Margot says, Ooh, filthy beast, go to the well. The marble-mouthed impersonation of Margot made Michael laugh. I don't blame her. I've seen how you track mud into the kitchen. After a thoughtful pause, Marabas said, I was in the tree outside her window. Margot said, filthy beast, and threw her apple at me. I fell. Michael put down his brush and covered a laugh. God's mercy, Marabas. What were you doing in the tree outside her window? Looking at Margot. You shouldn't do that. Why? Oh, that's spying. It's wrong. Michael sighed and drifted into a memory of Margot's embrace, an innocent hug from her, but it felt good. He'd always liked Margot. Then he imagined climbing the tree outside her window. There she was, a cider mistress. She opened up, but didn't throw an apple at him. Instead, she invited him in with a wicked grin, and he smelled her hair, and held the soft weight of her flesh in his hands, and tasted her skin. Ooh, filthy beast. It was an intoxicating fantasy. And oh, what's this? Intriguing. Someone's opening the door. Will be discovered. Scandalous. Who could it be? Fergus! Michael grimaced and shifted where he sat, coming back to reality. Marabas was off on his own as well. Spying is wrong. Don't do it. But he'd no sooner had the thought than it slipped away from him like a fish in the river. If it's wrong, don't do it. Wrong means bad. But why is spying bad? I like it. Margot doesn't like it. Margot threw her apple at me and I fell. It's bad to get caught spying. Marabas said, I like looking in Sarah's window. That part of the tree had better cover. Morabus! What? Don't do that. It's inappropriate. God's mercy, she's a little girl. You should be ashamed of yourself. Don't do that ever again. Okay. Don't spy on little girls. Michael frowned, but understood it was only the Gunders' natural curiosity. Morabus didn't mean any harm, and, after more thought, Michael realized that Sarah wasn't a little girl anymore. She must be 16 years old now. Morabus was only 10. Though mature for a Gunder, Michael thought it not unusual for a boy of that age to spy on a 16-year-old girl. Then he imagined himself in the tree outside of Sarah's room. She giggled and opened the window. Oh, how naughty it was to climb in and be alone with her. But wait, who's this opening the door? Why, it's Margot. Michael lost several more guilty minutes to thoughts of Margot and her daughters before his conscience once again presented him with Fergus. Samuel was right. It was foolish to remain celibate if he was going to break the most sacred vow anyway. Celibacy was a precaution, a way of ensuring his priorities, as were his vows of poverty and obedience. They were meant to keep worldly concerns from compromising his silence. Without silence, the other vows were meaningless. It would be easy to find a wife. He was the most powerful and important man in Antioch. There was no use in pretending otherwise. Everyone needed him to survive. He imagined there would be 100 women lined up at his door with fresh-baked pies if he made it clear that he was out and about. He could have any of them. He could have all of them, for that matter, if he wanted, and the Fellowship couldn't say boo about it. It would be their suicide to shun him. In fact, he could have Margot. No, those are just fantasies. It would be their suicide to shun me. He remembered the man who refused hospital earlier that day. No, thank you. Michael frowned, seeing the man's pretense of sacrificing his life for his beliefs as a foolhardy and selfish gesture, inconsiderate of the consequences to others. It must have come from ignorance. No one could know about the Bowron and hold to such principle. Michael had wanted to break that man's neck at the time, not open the way. Then he thought of a man willing to sacrifice any number of lives for the sake of his beliefs. Salem will rot before I break my vows. Michael envisioned driving his Callaghan through Abraham's head in the hallway, pinning him to the wall like a holiday decoration. It made the most satisfying sound. Whack. Hanging from the sword, Abraham's corpse spoke. Without strict inhibiting law, that's exactly what you'll be, a devil. Michael shook the image from his head. He couldn't keep violence out of his mind any better than he could keep Fergus out of his fantasies. It would always be there, assuming every man had such a willful and disturbing imagination, and that actions were what truly mattered. He whispered, No, Abraham. They're only my thoughts. Morabus looked up. What? Michael said. Nothing. I was just thinking out loud. The idea amazed Morabus. He wondered if all men could do that. Then he started to wonder if they could listen out loud too, and tried calling the man's name telepathically. Michael? Can you hear me? Michael? Michael pulled his brush back out of the bucket. The milk was a dark, scummy gray. He stuck his finger in it for a taste. It was revolting, but it didn't fizzle. Morabus, when was the last time you dipped your brush in the milk? Morabus looked from one end of the table to the other, thinking about time. Michael waited. Then he said, Is it still working? But that caused the Gunder another bout of contemplation. God's mercy, Morabus, smell the brush. Is the smoke dead on the brush? A quick snort, and Morabus said, Yes. Michael thought about it. Morabus had scrubbed nearly an entire banquet table with one dip. The milk was strong. On the lonely street outside, a frightened young man approached. He was coughing, rubbing his eyes, and holding a torn note. Knowing what had happened in the cauldron, and that it was filled with deadly devil smoke, he stood far away from the open door to call through. Michael! Are you in there? Michael answered from inside. Don't come in, I'm coming out. He emerged, wiping his hands with one of Fergus' rags. The young man handed him the note. It read, I am at the cauldron. Michael. Michael's expression went flat. He offered hospital. When the young man woke up, Michael was kneeling next to him with a bucket of scummy milk. Morabus crouched nearby. Michael dunked the young man's hands in the milk and told him about its strength. Michael said, Tell everyone about the milk. It's important. It's something anyone can use to protect themselves from the smoke. Yes, sir, I will. Thank you, sir. He started to go. Wait! Michael slapped the note into the young man's wet hand and gave him a look of stern disapproval. Put that back on the door of my church, please. It's not doing anyone any good over here. Oh, yes, sir. Sorry, sir. He scampered away into the night. Michael hoped no one was waiting at the church, having missed that note. He didn't often call names, and wasn't one to say dumber than a Gunder, especially considering his company. But removing the note was such a remarkably poor decision. Michael thought of Drake and borrowed a word from Ditch. "That boy is a dookus," Morabas said. "What's that?" It's a word the sailors use to mean foolish." "Is it dumber than a Gunder?" "Morabas, don't say that." "Why?" Morabas cocked his head to one side. Everyone said dumber than a Gunder. "I don't like it when you say that." Michael went to put a friendly hand on his shoulder, but Morabas flinched at the motion, ready to flee. Michael linked his hands behind his back. "It's a bad thing to say. It's wrong to call Gunders dumb, and to make light of them. It's just not right." He went back inside. Morabas followed in a trance of thought. When they'd finished milking the building, Michael locked the front door and moved back through the kitchen to leave. He imagined the cauldron would smell like the biggest, nastiest sailor in the morning. At the back door he remembered to reward Morabas for the help. "That was a fine hind you had this morning. Did you have your fill of it?" Morabas looked confused, so Michael tried to clarify. "You had that deer. Did you eat it?" "No, I don't like it raw. I took it back to the Greer." "Ah, that's right. They do the hunting, don't they?" "Yes, I like the Greer." "I'd imagine you do. You should be careful stealing their kills away so often to Fergus. Surely they'll thrash you for it one of these days." Morabas thought about that. Then his face squinched up with glee and he laughed. The sound was as harsh and startling as the sudden braying of a mule. Michael took a step back. Morabas didn't laugh often among men. The way they spoke confused him, often meaning more or something other than what they said. He understood this time, though, and it was ridiculous. His long, sharp teeth showed in his smile. "No! The Greer like me!" He was his pride's apoc. He kept the other Gunders away. The Greer wouldn't attack him, not unless he startled them. Michael had never spent so much time alone with a Gunder. The evening had been enlightening. "I see. Are you hungry?" All mirth vanished instantly from Morabas' face, replaced by a focused animal intensity. "Yes." Michael took another step back. Fergus told me to thank you for helping if you did, and that you can have whatever you want from the smokehouse. So, have at it." Morabas' eyes popped, and he shot out of the kitchen. Michael shook his head and laughed. He leaned against the doorway, listening to the ravaging of the shed. The snorting, grunting, and munching were pure. That lusty Gunder doesn't worry about anything. He just takes his meals as they come. Michael felt a small pang of jealousy, and then laughed at himself as well. The sun hid under the trees just on the rise, and Morabas was stuffed. A wobble from the cider in his stride, he made his way home through the deep forest to the north, to the Pride. The pup, Barabbas, lounged in the bushes with his brother. Both of them were lean and shaggy-headed with long, toothy faces. Neither could grow a Gunder's beard yet. They had bright blue eyes as well that wouldn't turn amber until they matured. Barabbas smelled his father on the wind and perked up. "Apoc is coming," his brother said. "Let's get him!" They stalked the trail that led to the men. Their pupils were wide black discs in the bordering leaves, and their faces twitched toward any movement. They could see quite well at night, but they didn't see Morabas. They held their breath to listen. In a moment of dead silence, a sudden roaring and horrifying doom barreled through the leaves between them. The pups shot straight up into the air, twisting, hissing, and screeching for their lives. It wasn't until their father's barks and snarls became his braying laughter that they stopped ripping through the brush to escape. Even then they stayed hidden, quivering from the icy fear he'd just poured into their veins. Morabas said, "Ha ha, pups! You can't get me! You're a dookus!" He moved on to the tree, cackling like a drunken jackass. Barabbas popped up and shared a look with his brother. Then they followed after their father, pushing each other into the bushes and mimicking his frightening roar. The Greer, 6 adult females, heard Morabas coming from far away. He made sure of it. When he arrived, they were resting quietly around the roots of a tree as ancient and twisted as Daniel's oak. They were braiding each other's hair, sewing deerskin into clothing, and relaxing, preparing to sleep through the morning and afternoon. They looked similar to women until their teeth. Morabas stopped in front of them, yawned, and scratched. He had nothing to say. They looked up at him without anything to say either, so, since all was well, he vaulted up to his branch and made himself comfortable. From a distance or in the dark, she appeared to be a girl of Sarah's age, but Nyla was only 3 years old. She'd been in season for the first time that summer, and her belly was round with Morabas' pups. She said, "Apoc smells like milk and mushrooms." It was an unnecessary thing to say, but she was young. Barabbas' mother, Diana, stretched, flexed her thick fingers and toes, and extended her smooth, hidden talons. Then she humored Nyla with conversation. "That's man's food. The men feed Apoc." "Why?" Because Apoc is strong and clever. Marabas settled into the crook of his bow and looked up at the leaves, hands behind his head. He thought about the word wrong. It was one of the more confusing words. Michael used it a lot. Michael said spying was wrong and dumber than a Gunder was wrong. Bethford said it was wrong to feed Gunders. Fergus said it was wrong to use shortening instead of butter. The word meant don't do it, but it also meant why. It was the why in the word that made Marabas curious, because that seemed to change from man to man. Marabas climbed up, crouched on the bough at his father's feet, and said, "Apoc, what's Dukas?" Marabas lifted his head to look down at his son. Then he put a foot on the pup's face and pushed. "Get out of my tree!" Marabas scrabbled to hold on, hissed, and fell, crashing through the leaves to the forest floor. Marabas reclined into thought as his son mewled below, and the pride brayed like a herd of donkeys in the darkness. That is the end of Chapter 16. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow the link at the top of my website, www.williameharlan.com, and purchase the full novel from Amazon in ebook format for $2.99, or as a paperback for $12.99. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for Chapter 17, Funerals.